violent law. We have a warrant to search this property. Step aside.
Okay. Show me the warrant.
We don't have to show you anything. We're executing a lawful search.
Actually, under the Fourth Amendment, you're required to present the warrant before entry.
Lady, you're interfering with a police investigation. That's a crime.
It's 7:15 on a Saturday morning in Boston. The kind of morning where the city is still quiet, where most people are sleeping in, where the world feels peaceful. And then 3 hard knocks on the door. Bang, bang, bang. 3 police officers stand in tactical gear, vests reading police in bold letters. They're confident. They've done this dozens of times before. Knock. Announce. Enter. Search. It's routine. It's what they do. But the woman who opens that door? She's about to change everything they thought they knew about power. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Let me tell you about Maya Richardson, 29 years old, black woman, federal prosecutor. But those words don't even begin to capture who she really is. See, Maya didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a prosecutor. She became one because she had to. Because she grew up watching her father, a man who worked 2 jobs, who never missed a day, who did everything right, get pulled over again and again and again for driving while black. That's what they call it. That's what it was. She remembers being 7 years old in the back seat of their car when flashing lights appeared behind them. She remembers her father's hands gripping the steering wheel. She remembers the fear in his voice when he said, "Put your hands where they can see them, baby." She remembers thinking, why is Daddy scared? That question never left her. So Maya studied. She fought. She clawed her way through Stanford Law School with honors. She clerked for a federal judge who taught her everything about criminal procedure, about rights, about the Constitution. And then, when every big law firm in the country was offering her 6-figure salaries, she turned them all down. She took a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, making maybe a third of what she could have made. Why? Because Maya didn't want to defend corporations. She wanted to prosecute criminals, specifically criminals who wore badges. For 3 years, she worked in the Public Corruption Unit. That's the division that goes after government officials who abuse their power. And Maya? She specialized in dirty cops, illegal searches, planted evidence, false testimony, civil rights violations. The cases that made other prosecutors nervous, Maya took eagerly. She had an 87% conviction rate, which in public corruption cases is almost unheard of. She'd sent 14 officers to federal prison. 14 people who thought they were untouchable. Defense attorneys hated her. Police unions called her biased, anti-cop, a crusader with an agenda. But here's what made Maya truly dangerous. She didn't just know the law. She knew their world. She'd spent hundreds of hours riding along with officers, watching how they worked, learning their tactics, understanding their culture. She'd reviewed thousands of police reports, body camera videos, arrest records. She could spot a fake warrant from a mile away. She could identify violations that other prosecutors missed. And she had a particular specialty, warrant fraud. That's when officers lie to get search warrants. When they exaggerate facts, invent informants, claim probable cause that doesn't exist. It's how some cops bypass the Constitution. They just lie to a judge, get a signature, and then kick in doors with legal cover. Maya had prosecuted 14 cases involving warrant fraud. She'd won every single one. And on this Saturday morning in Boston, 3 officers were about to learn exactly why. Maya lived in a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was somewhere between rough and gentrified. Artists, young professionals, small businesses. She bought the place 3 years earlier, a building with 2 units. She lived upstairs. The downstairs tenant was a guy named Marcus Diaz. Marcus was 31, originally from the Dominican Republic. Quiet. Kept to himself. Paid rent on time. They weren't close, but they were friendly. He'd helped her carry groceries once. She'd sign for his packages. Normal neighbor stuff. What Maya didn't know, what Marcus barely knew himself, was that his younger brother Luis was tangled up in some bad stuff. Drug dealing. Nothing big, but enough to get the attention of Boston PD's narcotics unit. The narcotics unit had been watching Luis for months, following him, tracking his movements, trying to build a case. And during that surveillance, they'd seen Luis visit Marcus's building. They saw him go inside. 20 minutes later, he came out carrying a gym bag. That was it. One visit, one gym bag. But in the minds of officers David Murphy, Tyler Chin, and Jessica Reynolds, that was enough. Drugs were obviously being stored in that building. They didn't know which unit. They didn't have any actual evidence. Just an assumption. Just a gut feeling. Just nothing. But they wanted a warrant anyway. So, they did what they'd done many times before. They wrote up a warrant application filled with lies and exaggerations dressed up as facts. They claimed they had a reliable confidential informant who provided specific information about drug activity at that address. They didn't. They claimed they'd observed multiple suspicious visits by known dealers. They'd seen one. They claimed they had corroborating evidence of drug transactions at that location. They had zero. They submitted the application to a magistrate judge on a Friday afternoon when judges are rushing through paperwork to get home for the weekend, and the judge, not reading carefully, signed it. The warrant was for the entire building. Both units, even though they only suspected one person in one unit from one visit. That's how sloppy it was. That's how little they cared. So Saturday morning, 7:15 a.m., 3 officers in tactical gear knock on the main door. Maya had been up early. She'd gone for a run, showered, and was making coffee when she heard the pounding. She walked to the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair still damp. Through the window, she saw 3 people in police gear. She opened the door, but only as far as the chain would allow. David Murphy, the lead officer, saw a young black woman in casual clothes, and he made an assumption, the first of many he would regret. "We have a warrant to search this property," he said. "Step aside." Maya's response was immediate and calm. "Okay, show me the warrant." Murphy bristled. "We don't have to show you anything. We're executing a lawful search." And that's when Maya said the words that would change everything. Actually, under the Fourth Amendment, you're required to present the warrant before entry. Murphy tried the authority play, the intimidation tactic. "Lady, you're interfering with a police investigation. That's a crime." Maya didn't blink. And conducting a warrantless search is a constitutional violation. That's also a crime. "Now, show me the warrant." There was steel in her voice. Not anger. Not fear. Just absolute certainty. Murphy hesitated. Something in her tone made him pause. This wasn't going like it usually did. People usually just complied. "Who do you think you are?" he said. And Maya told him exactly who she was. "I'm an assistant United States attorney. I prosecute corrupt police officers for a living. And if you enter this property without showing me a valid warrant, I will have federal charges filed against you by Monday morning. Now, show me the warrant." The hallway went silent. Murphy looked at Chun and Reynolds. You could see it on their faces, the calculation, the doubt, the sudden realization that this wasn't routine anymore. Murphy pulled a folded document from his pocket and held it up. "Slide it under the door," Maya said, "so I can read it properly." Murphy hesitated. Then he did. Maya picked up the document and read it. Every single line. Every word. Every date. Every claim of probable cause. The 3 officers stood in the hallway, waiting. 2 minutes felt like 20. And when Maya looked up, her expression had changed. She wasn't just defending her rights anymore. She was looking at evidence of a crime. She opened the door fully, stepped into the hallway, held the warrant in her hand, and then she started asking questions. Who's the confidential informant who allegedly provided information about drug activity at this address? Murphy shifted his weight. I can't reveal that. That's fine, Maya said, evenly. I'll subpoena the CI's identity in federal court. And we both know what happens when no CI exists. Murphy's face went pale. The warrant claims multiple controlled buys occurred at this location, Maya continued. When were they? What dates? What times? What amounts? That information is in the case file, Murphy said. Then give me the case number. I'll review the file myself. Murphy gave her a number. She wrote it down. Which unit are you actually searching? Both. Why both units when you have no specific information about either one? The warrant covers the whole building. Maya's eyes narrowed. A warrant has to be specific about the place to be searched. Searching an entire building when you only have suspicion about one unidentified unit is a general warrant, prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. Murphy was sweating now, not from heat, from pressure. Maya asked one more question, and this one ended everything. This warrant was signed by Judge Patricia Hoffman, correct? Murphy looked at the paper. Yes. Maya smiled. Not a happy smile. A knowing smile. I know Judge Hoffman personally. She's extremely careful about warrant applications. She would never sign something this sloppy unless someone misrepresented the facts to her. And I'll be visiting her office first thing Monday morning with this warrant in hand. Then she looked directly at Murphy. You're David Murphy, aren't you? He nodded slowly. The same David Murphy who's been investigated twice before for questionable search warrants? The silence was crushing. Maya gave them a choice. You can walk away right now. I'll file a complaint with your department and the U.S. Attorney's Office. There'll be an investigation. Or you can try to execute this clearly defective warrant, and I will personally ensure that federal criminal charges are filed against you for deprivation of rights under color of law. That carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. She paused. Choose carefully. And choose quickly. Chin and Reynolds looked at Murphy. Murphy looked at the warrant in Maya's hands. Then he looked at the door behind her, knowing that whatever they might find inside would never be worth federal prison. For the first and possibly only time that morning, David Murphy made a smart choice. We're leaving, he said quietly. I'm keeping the original warrant, Maya said. As evidence. Murphy tried to argue. Maya reminded him that as a federal prosecutor, she was seizing it as evidence of a potential federal crime. The three officers left. Maya closed the door, went back inside, and made a phone call to her supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then she called the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. Then she called Internal Affairs at Boston PD. By 8 a.m., 3 different investigations had been opened. By Monday morning, David Murphy was on administrative leave. His warrant applications for the past 2 years were being reviewed by federal agents and prosecutors. By Wednesday, the FBI had interviewed Judge Hoffman, who was furious when she learned how her trust had been exploited. By Friday, David Murphy was arrested on federal charges, 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 1 count of perjury on a warrant application. Each count carried a potential 10-year sentence. Chun and Reynolds weren't charged criminally, but both were suspended. They resigned before the investigation concluded. But the investigation didn't stop with Murphy. Federal agents pulled all the warrant applications from the narcotics unit for the past 3 years, and they found a pattern. Exaggerated probable cause, fabricated informant information, vague descriptions, general warrants. They found 27 warrants with the same problems. 27 potentially illegal searches. 27 cases that might have violated people's constitutional rights. Do you think entire police units should be held accountable when patterns like this emerge? Let me know in the comments. Maya was assigned as lead prosecutor. The case took 9 months to build. Her team interviewed dozens of people who'd been searched by Murphy's unit. They reviewed hundreds of warrant applications. They identified 12 other officers involved in questionable warrants. The unit supervisor, Lieutenant Robert Callahan, was found to have approved many of the problematic warrants without proper review. He was charged too. David Murphy went to trial. He claimed he'd acted in good faith, that he genuinely believed there was probable cause, that any errors were honest mistakes. Maya dismantled his defense piece by piece. She showed the jury 12 different warrant applications where Murphy had used nearly identical language to describe different confidential informants who didn't exist. She showed them how Murphy's warrants always got approved on Friday afternoons when judges were busy. She showed them that his targets were overwhelmingly Black and Latino residents in specific neighborhoods. She called witnesses who testified about Murphy's team entering their homes, finding nothing, and leaving without apology. Most of them were Black and Latino families. She called a retired magistrate judge who explained exactly what information judges rely on when approving warrants, and how Murphy's lies had corrupted that process. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. David Murphy was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The conviction made headlines across Boston. The U.S. attorney held a press conference specifically mentioning that the case had been initiated because one of her prosecutors had personally witnessed an illegal search attempt. The coverage identified Maya as that prosecutor. Within 24 hours, she received death threats. Many of them were explicitly racist, targeting her as a Black woman who dared to prosecute white officers. She also received hundreds of emails thanking her, from families who'd been victims of similar illegal searches, from people who'd never had anyone fight for them before. The investigation into the narcotics unit continued. 3 more officers were charged federally. 8 others were fired. Lieutenant Callahan pleaded guilty and received 5 years. The Boston Police Department was forced to implement sweeping reforms. 1. Every warrant application now required review by a legal advisor. 2. All officers had to complete a 40-hour course on Fourth Amendment requirements. 3. Body cameras became mandatory for all search warrant executions. 4. An outside auditor was hired to review warrant applications quarterly. The district attorney's office reviewed all 27 cases where illegal warrants had been used. They dismissed charges in 19 cases. 5 people who'd been convicted were released from prison when their convictions were overturned. The city faced civil rights lawsuits from people who'd been illegally searched. The settlements totaled over $18 million. All of this happened because Maya Richardson refused to step aside when 3 officers showed up at her door with a defective warrant. Let's talk about what this really means. This story isn't just about one prosecutor stopping one illegal search. It's about what happens when someone with actual authority challenges police who are used to being unchallengeable. Most people don't know their rights when police show up with a warrant. They don't know the warrant has to be shown before entry. They don't know what probable cause means. They don't know they can read the warrant carefully and ask questions. They don't know what a defective warrant looks like. Police officers count on that ignorance. Not all officers, but enough that it's a systemic problem. Officers like David Murphy have been getting away with sloppy, questionable, and sometimes fraudulent warrants for years, because nobody pushed back effectively. But Maya wasn't a typical citizen. She was a federal prosecutor who specialized in this exact type of misconduct. She knew what questions to ask. She knew what red flags to look for. She knew how to analyze a warrant application and spot the lies. More importantly, she had the institutional power to actually do something about it. When she said she'd file federal charges, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise backed by the full weight of the Department of Justice. This case also highlights something deeper about police culture. David Murphy had been investigated twice before. Both times, he'd been cleared, not because he was innocent, but because the system protected him. Internal affairs investigations have conviction rates that are dramatically lower than prosecutions of civilian crimes. Why? Because police investigate police. Because departments prioritize protecting their officers over accountability. Because the culture values loyalty over integrity. It took a federal investigation, led by a prosecutor who wasn't part of that culture, to finally hold Murphy accountable. And even then, it only happened because he made the mistake of targeting someone who could fight back. Here's a question for you. Should all police misconduct investigations be handled by outside agencies instead of internal affairs? Comment below. The body camera footage from that morning became evidence in the case. It captured Murphy's initial aggression. It captured his refusal to show the warrant. It captured the moment Maya identified herself as a federal prosecutor. It captured Murphy's face when he realized he'd just tried to execute a questionable warrant on someone who could destroy his career. That footage is now shown to every officer in the Boston Police Department as part of mandatory training. It's titled Constitutional Requirements for Search Warrants, a case study. The video teaches 2 lessons. First, know the law and follow it. Second, every person you encounter might be someone who knows their rights better than you do. And if you're cutting corners, you will eventually get caught. Maya continued her work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. After the Murphy case, her caseload increased dramatically. People who'd been victims of police misconduct now knew there was a prosecutor who would actually pursue these cases aggressively. She's since prosecuted 23 additional officers for various forms of corruption. Her conviction rate remains above 85%. She still lives in the same warehouse loft. The downstairs unit is now rented by a teacher. Maya made sure her new neighbor knew exactly what had happened and assured her that nothing like that would ever happen again. Marcus Diaz, the original tenant, moved out shortly after the incident. Not because of anything Maya did, but because he was terrified that his brother's problems would follow him. Maya helped him get out of his lease early and wrote a reference letter for his new apartment. David Murphy is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. He'll be eligible for release in 2029. His law enforcement career is over. His pension was forfeited. His reputation is destroyed. Lieutenant Callahan is also in federal prison. The unit they supervised was disbanded. Some people said Maya should have just let them execute the warrant and filed a complaint afterward. They said confronting armed police officers was dangerous. Could have ended badly. Here's the thing. Maya had every legal right to demand to see the warrant before allowing entry. That's not confrontational. That's constitutional law. The Fourth Amendment requires it. Courts have consistently upheld it. As for the danger, Maya was very aware of the risk. As a black woman, she understood that confrontations with police carried additional danger. She'd prosecuted cases where confrontations had turned violent disproportionately against people who looked like her. She knew that asserting your rights while black can be life-threatening. But she also understood something else. If she, as a black federal prosecutor with institutional power and legal knowledge, didn't assert those rights, then ordinary black citizens had no hope of doing so. Someone with her advantages had a responsibility to push back. And she calculated correctly that once she identified herself as a federal prosecutor who specialized in police corruption, the officers would realize that any violence against her would bring consequences they couldn't escape. Not everyone has that privilege, and that's exactly the problem Maya is trying to fix through her work. So, what are the lessons here? First, know your rights regarding search warrants. Police must show you the warrant before entry. You have the right to read it carefully. You have the right to check if it's properly signed and dated. You have the right to see if it specifies your address and what they're looking for. Second, stay calm. Maya asked clear, direct questions. She didn't argue emotionally. She didn't volunteer information. She controlled the interaction through knowledge and composure. Third, document everything. If police execute a search warrant, take photos of any damage. Keep copies of all paperwork. Note names and badge numbers. Write down exactly what happened while it's fresh. Fourth, seek legal help immediately. If you believe a search was illegal, contact an attorney right away. There are strict time limits for challenging searches. Fifth, understand that accountability is possible, but requires follow-through. Maya didn't just stop the illegal search. She filed complaints with 3 different agencies. She cooperated with investigators. She prosecuted the case. She saw it through to the end. That's what creates change. As of now, David Murphy has 7 years left on his sentence. He filed an appeal arguing his conviction was unfair because the prosecutor had been personally involved. The appeal was denied. Maya Richardson was promoted to senior trial attorney in the public corruption unit. She now supervises other prosecutors working on police misconduct cases. She trains FBI agents on how to identify warrant fraud. She lectures at law schools about federal prosecution of civil rights violations. The Boston Police Department still operates under oversight, requiring outside review of warrant applications. Compliance has been mixed. Some officers embrace the reforms. Others resist them. Audits have found continued problems, though not as severe as during the Murphy era. None of these changes would have happened if Maya had stepped aside that Saturday morning. None of them would have happened if she'd let the illegal search proceed and complained later. None of them would have happened if she hadn't known her rights and had the power to enforce them. One prosecutor, one illegal warrant, 23 minutes at her front door, and an entire police unit was dismantled. That's the power of knowledge combined with institutional authority. That's what accountability looks like when someone with the ability to enforce it refuses to look away. That's what happens when corrupt officers finally encounter someone they can't intimidate. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from the story that you didn't know before? Drop your answer in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. This story matters because it reveals how police corruption thrives, not through dramatic Hollywood-style crime, but through routine corner-cutting, through assumptions that nobody will push back, through warrant applications that exaggerate facts because judges are too busy to scrutinize them carefully, through supervisors who approve questionable tactics because questioning officers is uncomfortable. Maya's story shows that these systems can be challenged, that corrupt officers can be prosecuted, that entire units can be held accountable when patterns of misconduct are exposed. That change is possible when someone with knowledge and authority refuses to accept business as usual. Not every illegal search gets stopped. Not every corrupt officer goes to prison. Not every victim has access to justice. But this one did, and that matters. The warrant application that David Murphy submitted that Friday afternoon is now used in law schools as an example of probable cause fraud. You can see where he claimed facts that didn't exist. You can see where he exaggerated suspicious activity. You can see exactly what warrant fraud looks like. And maybe, just maybe, the next time an officer thinks about cutting corners on a warrant application, they'll remember this case. They'll remember David Murphy serving 8 years in federal prison. They'll remember that the person whose door they knock on might be someone who knows the law better than they do. That's Maya's legacy. Not just prosecuting one corrupt cop, but showing that the system can work when people with power use it properly. That accountability is real when someone enforces it. That rights matter when someone defends them. This is the story of how an assistant United States attorney turned an attempted illegal search into federal prison sentences for multiple officers and systemic reform for an entire police department. But more than that, it's a story about courage, about knowledge, about the ongoing fight against corruption in law enforcement. Thanks for watching this story all the way through. If you found this eye-opening, make sure you're subscribed because I cover more stories like this that need to be told. Drop a comment letting me know what you think should happen in cases like these. See you in the next one.